We're on to the book of Ruth today, and this is Ruth chapters 1 to 4. But there is an odd thing about the chapters 1 to 4 in that is the entirety of the book of Ruth. It's this tiny 2.5-page book of the Bible. I hadn't realised that was going to be the case. It's apparently traditionally ascribed to being written by Samuel, who was supposed to have written the book of Judges as well. So it sounds like it's the same author, potentially. There is quite a difference in tone, has to be said. It doesn't read like the book of Judges does particularly. But fine. It sounds also like the events of the book of Ruth took place during the period covered by the book of Judges. And I suppose you have to beg the question, why do you not just shove it into the book of Judges? But I guess, given the tone's quite different, and the book of Judges is about what the judges got up to, and the book of Ruth has nothing to do with Judges, I guess that sort of makes some sense. It does mess up my playlist thing, though, because I'm doing a playlist for each of the books, for each of one, and that's completely out the window. So, great. Thanks, Old Testament. Anyway, the story starts with a lady called Naomi and her family, her husband and 2 sons. They live in Bethlehem, but there's a famine that comes along. Don't remember any famine from the book of Judges, but whatever. They then take off to the land of Moab. So this is the Moabites and the Israelites have been fighting at various points and oppressing each other. So it seems like quite an extreme action going off to Moab. And there's no detail, but it seems at some point after this, Naomi's sons marry Moabite women, but then the 2 sons die and Naomi's husband dies, and Naomi is left on her own with 2 daughters-in-law. One of these daughters-in-law is Ruth, of the title, and Ruth vows she's going to stick with Naomi and look after her. This is despite the fact that Naomi's a bit of a cranky old whinge bag about it. I mean, don't get me wrong, her sons have both died and her husband, and sounds like she's old, and it's not a great situation to be in, clearly. But my goodness, she's really quite grumpy about it. She even decides she's going to change her name from Naomi to Mara, because Mara apparently means bitter. And this bitterness is aimed at God. So it's like a proper full-on Israelite whinge bagging, as we've seen plenty of, I suppose. But anyway, the famine lifts in Bethlehem. So Naomi/Mara and Ruth go back there. And then Ruth goes to work in the fields for an old family friend of Naomi and her husband. This is a chap called Boaz, who seems to be nice. Sounds like he's much older, but he sounds like a nice guy anyway. So he takes Ruth under his arm, looks after them, and seems like a generally decent bloke. There's some stuff at this point that's weird and clearly of its time. And it seems Boaz seems to take a bit of a fancy for Ruth, despite the fact he calls her daughter. Maybe that's just translation stuff, but clearly calling her daughter. And she seems to take quite a liking to him. And Naomi at one point says, we'll go along when he's done all his work in the field and he's lying down in the barn having a snooze. Go and uncover his feet and lie down next to him. It's like, okay, fine. Yeah, I like to sleep with my feet out, other than cats. But yeah, apparently that's some sort of big deal and gesture of intent or something like that. Either way, Boaz and Ruth end up getting married. They have a son, and then we go off into one of these lineages that the Bible hasn't done for a little while, actually, taking us down from Ruth's son to King David, as in David and Goliath fame, who we'll be coming on to shortly. So, kind of a bit of a weird story. 3 people die, but for the Old Testament, it's a pretty happy ending, I think. It's quite a nice, easy one to read, nice and sort of refreshingly upbeat. But yeah, that is it. It's 4 pages long. The tone is quite different to Judges, but then obviously the nature of the story is quite different to the book of Judges. And nothing really happens other than a foreigner goes back and is very noble, looks after its mother-in-law, gets married to some dude, and has a kid who turns out to be ancestor to King David. No doubt I'm missing more than usual in this, because someone has obviously gone to the trouble of thinking, yes, this 4 pages book of Ruth, the whole thing, we must put it in the Bible. And it's like, okay. The lineage of King David, I guess, is obviously going to be key. But I think actually more interestingly, Ruth being this goody who's worthy of her own book in the whole Bible, is a foreigner who comes back to the Israelites, and a foreigner from a tribe that's had a lot of trouble with the Israelites. So I quite like that, because way back we're having trouble with this whole idea of God's people, the Israelites, and everyone else just seemed to be like, just oppress these people, drive them out, whatever. And the idea of, okay, we've got another exemption from a crowd of people that historically have not been favoured by God. So it does make the further point, I think, that it's not about where they're from, it's about who they are. So Ruth may be a Moabite who are generally not being well regarded by God or the Israelites, but she's clearly a good person. So I kind of like that. It sort of seems to tidy up some of the problems of some of the total language from earlier on, where wipe out the Moabites or whatever, or drive out the Moabites. Ruth is a Moabite, but she's clearly a goodie and clearly being held in high favour. So yeah, that is both the story of the Book of Ruth and my summary of the Book of Ruth. So we've all done an entire season in one video, short video as well, I imagine. But yeah, otherwise we're going to get that's done and we're going to move on to the Book of Samuel.